I mean, you watch the song. You're not turning off, you're not looking for an exit.
All right, I think we're ready to get going here. Thank you so much for coming to what is really one of the very first events of the book festival. My name is Liz Wyckoff, and I'm an editor at the Wisconsin Historical Society Press. I was the editor of Stu Levitan's book, Madison in the 60s, and I'm really honored to be introducing Stu today. Before I start the introduction, just a couple little housekeeping things. I want to thank the Madison Public Library and the Madison Public Library Foundation just for making events like this possible and this wonderful festival. I also want to remind everyone to silence their cell phones. It's always a good thing to do while you're at a book reading. And if you're here for this event, it's possible that you might be interested in some of the other events happening this weekend, and one that I want to promote sort of selfishly as someone from the WH Press is Jerry App's reading from his book, Once a Professor, which happens tomorrow at 3 p.m. at the Wisconsin Historical Museum. Last thing, after the event, which is going to take about 50 minutes, Stu will be signing books just outside in the Madison room, which is the one with the big windows overlooking Overture. So if you want to stand in line and get it signed by Stu, you're welcome to do so. So on to the intro. In a blurb on the book's back cover, David Marinus refers to Stu as Madison's expert chronicler, and this couldn't be a more apt description. In addition to this book, Stu is the author of Madison, the Illustrated Sesquicentennial History, published by the UW Press, and he's written about Madison's history for Madison Magazine, Isthmus, On Wisconsin, Capital Times, and many other local publications. But in addition to this research and writing work, Stu has served on the Dane County Board of Supervisors. He has chaired the Zoning Board of Appeals, the Plan Commission, the Community Development Authority, and the Landmarks Commission. And he's currently Vice President of the Wart FM Board of Directors, where he hosts a weekly podcast, Madison in the 60s, on Wednesday nights, which everyone here should check out. So obviously Stu is an influential Madison resident, not just for chronicling the city's history, but also for helping to shape it. It's really one of the great pleasures of my job as an editor to work with authors who care deeply about their subject matter. This is true of most authors, but I've rarely worked with someone who feels quite as passionately as Stu does about the material in this book. Throughout the course of bringing Madison in the 60s into being, I watched as he delighted in almost every aspect of his process, whether it was digging up little-known or long-forgotten morsels from old newspapers, sifting through folder after folder of musty negatives to find just the right image to accompany a narrative, or crafting the perfect turn of phrase in order to both entertain and educate his readers. The end product, I believe, reflects all of Stu's hard work, his signature sense of humor, of course his love of Bob Dylan, but above all, it reveals his absolute devotion to Madison and its history. So I guarantee you that you're going to love seeing Madison in the 60s through his eyes. Please help me in welcoming Stu Levitan.
Thank you all for coming. Passionate is code word for boy, do we occasionally have some fights. Most of which I lost, but deservedly so. And in addition to all the thanks well, first I want to thank Liz and everyone at the press, everyone here at the festival and the library, Connor and Greg Michaels and Jenny Collins. Please do continue to support the festival and the foundation. I also want to thank Kristen Gilpatrick, who went, as we Rotarians say, service above self. She drove down to Peoria the other day to get copies of the book so we could have books for you here today. And I thank her. And I also want to thank my fellow Rotarian, Mark Levy, who is, you see, the signature sponsor. And if you read the footnotes closely in the book, you'll find he was also a very active reporter back from the Daily Cardinal in the day. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book. I will read some sections from the chapter on 1968 and show you some slides. And then I hope we'll have plenty of time for some questions. Talking about the 60s is just decadism, the counterculture clown prince Wavy Gravy told me at a UW symposium in 1978. And he was right, of course. The 60s is an artificial construct that didn't begin on January 1st, 1960 and end on December 31st, 1969. But the book does. Because even when you're writing about the era of sex, drugs, rock and roll, there have to be some limits. The book focuses on the 5 issues that really dominated the decade. Frank Lloyd Wright's Monona Terrace Auditorium and Civic Center, urban renewal, civil rights, the University of Wisconsin, and student anti-war protests. We also discuss the issues that are important every decade. Politics, the public schools, planning and development, highways and transportation, crime and disorder, arts and entertainment, and death. There are enough names and numbers in the book to make it a useful reference book, but it is not the encyclopedia of the 60s. Nor is it an attempt to explain what the 60s meant to Madison or what Madison meant to the 60s. My purpose is more fundamental. It is just to chronicle the reality of the civic and political 60s in Madison beyond the myths and false memories, of which there are many. Once we establish what really happened, then we can talk about what it all meant and maybe even write another book about it. So, Madison, 1968, yes, sex, drugs, rock and roll, and the worst year yet for race relations, with frequent fights between blacks and whites, and relations between blacks and the all-white police force hitting a new low. On campus, students act up, the Empire Strikes Back, imposing new restrictive rules and regulations. There's a failed effort at gun control, debates over mace and riot gear, rising crime, including townie attacks on students, and a fetishistic murder that still goes officially unsolved. Social upheaval in the schools, a summer of labor strikes at Gisholt and Rayovac, and an election day earthquake that permanently changes the political landscape. Here are some of those stories. The first is about our unique and enduring civic saga. Many other cities in the 60s had civil rights crises and urban renewal controversies and university protests, but only Madison had Monona Terrace. This is Frank Lloyd Wright's final rendering of Monona Terrace, finished on February 15, 1959, 7 weeks before his death. No building since the Capitol has meant more to Madison than Monona Terrace Auditorium and Civic Center, and no building ever meant more to Mr. Wright. As the 60s opened, this is the building Madison believed it was going to build, going as far as going out to bid in 1961. By this point, conservative politicians and businessmen had already delayed construction for 2 years because they hated Wright, sometimes rightly, or they hated the Law Park site. Then liberal pro-Monona Terrace Mayor Ivan Nestigan takes a job with the Kennedy administration. The bids come in bad. Conservative anti-terrace businessman Henry Reynolds gets elected, and in April 1962, voters approve a referendum terminating this project and directing the city to find another site. The voters killed Monona Terrace. Mayor Reynolds was never able to find that other site. The years pass, we come to 1968. Otto Fesky, the former Democratic county clerk, has been the moderately liberal pro-Monona Terrace mayor since 1965. And in 1967, we get this: the view from the lake of the Law Park Auditorium, detail from the Monona Basin Plan. As 1968 opens, this is the vision Madison has of the Law Park area: a 2,350-seat civic auditorium, a 1,000-seat state theater, 20,000 square feet of exhibition space, 2,000-seat banquet hall. It is essentially Overture Hall, the Capitol Theater, and 45% of our Monona Terrace. It is designed by William Wesley Peters of Taliesin Architects, the widower of Frank Lloyd Wright's adopted daughter, Svetlana. Obviously owes much to Wright's design, but as you can see, he has the boats sailing in the opposite direction. Unfortunately, Peters does mimic his late father-in-law by incorporating the worst element of Wright's design for the original Monona Terrace, ruining the view with parking. 3 levels around the banquet room and lobby, extending 500 feet into the lake. And the Law Park Olin Terrace project is just phase 1 of Monona Basin, a staggering statement of architectural ambition that covers nearly 3 miles of lakeshore. It is John Nolan's Grand Esplanade on steroids. It will take decades to build and cost about $25 million, $180 million in today's dollars. I think that estimate is low, but then again, this is a Taliesin project. To the east of Law Park, you can see a public marina and large community center, updating Wright's design from 1893, which was scuttled in the economic panic of that year. Across the water at Olin Park, a cultural complex with theater, recital hall, art center, a natural amphitheater, and a boat launch. Those who hated Wright for political or personal reasons, such as economic development activist Joseph Jackson, or hated the Law Park site for economic reasons, such as Southside Alderman and construction union labor leader Harold Babe Rohr, maintain their opposition, but most like what they see. Architectural Forum and Progressive Architecture both call it a milestone. The council holds a public hearing in late January, and on February 22nd, only 8 weeks after it was introduced, the council by 15-4 approves the Monona Basin Plan and directs Peters to prepare a schematic design for the auditorium, which the council approves by voice vote in early August. I look forward to groundbreaking next spring, Mayor Festi says, hopefully. And this is what William Wesley Peters unveils for the Auditorium Committee on September 9th, 1968. Development drawings for what he calls a great circular drum, 80 feet high, sheathed in soft golden brick, and designed, he said, to combine a theater's joyous pageantry with the noble dignity of a civic building in a great state capital. But he concedes the limited construction budget of $5.4 million means the building will be very usable, but unfinished. And the parking ramp still blocks the view from the lake. None of this matters to the council. On September 10th, the day after the design was presented to committee with only one 15-minute presentation by the architect, the council votes 17-4 to approve the drawings and directs Peters to prepare construction documents. He says they'll be ready by mid-February, presuming the bids come in within budget, and April 1969 groundbreaking, grand opening the following fall. That is, as 1968 ends, Madison has a reasonable expectation it is about to cap a 15-year of effort and build this civic auditorium as the first element of the comprehensive Monona Basin Plan. Had it been built, it would have been vastly inferior to our Monona Terrace and might well have precluded construction of Overture Center. So, even though those who delayed and fought and killed the original Monona Terrace and Monona Basin did so for what I regard as bad reasons, they had a good result. As to why this wasn't built, well, that's a story from 1969. You will have to buy the book. Turning now to a more fundamental issue. This photo is from April 5th, 1968. For the first time since 1965, civil rights is once again, for a time, the top issue on campus, and not because things are going so well. April 5th, 1968, once again, thousands gathered to grieve atop Bascom Hill, just as they did in November 1963, for the state's official memorial service for President Kennedy. But this time, the mourning is different. The morning after Dr. Martin Luther King's assassination starts with a heated disagreement between Chancellor William Sewell and a group of about 20 black students over their competing plans for service that noon at Lincoln Terrace. Sewell, who has already canceled Friday afternoon classes, wants the students to speak during a formal university program, an idea they emphatically shout down. Black people must lead the program, not just speak as part of it, declares Sidney Glass, head of Concerned Black People. Things get very tense. The chancellor yields. He'll make some opening comments, announce that he's keeping buildings open for students to gather afterwards to talk, and then turn the program over to the black students, who are understandably angry and bitter. Clara Meek, one of 5 students to speak during the 20-minute program, breaks into tears. "I have a dream too," she says to the crowd of about 10,000, almost all white, "that one day every darn one of you is going to pay." Kenneth Irwin says, "There is no other course that black people can take but to riot." Also, unlike President Kennedy's memorial, there's a march. At an estimated 15,000, fully filling 6 blocks of State Street, it is the largest demonstration in Madison's history, other than to celebrate a Big Ten championship or the end of a war. Rows of black Madisonians up front link arms and alternate between freedom songs and militant chants. "Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around," interspersed with "Black Power." They march around the Capitol and up Wisconsin Avenue, heading down Langdon Street to the foot of Science Hall, where they sing 2 choruses of "We Shall Overcome," then move in large numbers to the buildings that Sewell has kept open. Once there, they stay for hours, black and white, engaging in the most candid conversations about race this campus has ever seen. Sewell, observing the packed auditorium in the social sciences building since named in his honor, thinks it's the capstone to, quote, "the greatest day for education that had ever hit the campus." The regents aren't so impressed. They pass a rule requiring chancellors to get permission from the president and the executive committee before declaring a campus holiday. It's dark and windy on Sunday afternoon as a crowd of 3,000 gathers at the Capitol for the community's official program. Concerned Black People's Ardenette Tucker continues the theme, condemning the Madison community, which still believes, quote, "there are no race problems here. I will break some windows to make you care." 4 white men, Reverend Alfred Swan, Professor Maurice Zeitlin, businessman Jack Van Metterheim, and Father Joseph Hammer, lead the silent march down State Street and out University Avenue to the First Congregational Church for a memorial service attended by an overflow crowd and numerous dignitaries. Equal Opportunities Chair Reverend James Wright speaks. Reverend Swan recites Lincoln's second inaugural. Rabbi Manfred Swarzensky reads scripture. And Reverend Robert Borkhardt reads from King's letter from Birmingham jail. Reverend Richard Pritchard, the only Madison cleric to have spent time in the South working for civil rights, is not invited to participate in the program. 3 weeks later, the greatest of all time comes to campus. It's been 10 years since Cassius Clay lost the Pan American Games championship at the Fieldhouse. 3 days short of a year since Muhammad Ali refused induction in the armed forces and was stripped of his title. And 10 months since he was convicted of draft evasion and sentenced to 5 years in prison. Now, on April 26th, the champ is speaking as the headliner for the International Students Against War, Racism, and the Draft program at the Stock Pavilion. But he only wants to talk about one of those things. "I'm not here promoting anything anti-draft, and I'm not here to talk about the war," he says. "I'm here on behalf of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to present the Black Muslim solution to racism." At first, Ali dominates the stage just as he did the ring. The crowd chuckles when he says he doesn't have the complexion or the connection to talk about his conviction while it's under appeal. And they roar when he sets forth what he calls the Black Muslim Economic Development Program. "We don't want no pie in the sky when we die. We want something sound on the ground while we are still around." But Ali's call for complete separation of the races doesn't go over so well. The largely white student crowd grumbles when he calls integration hypocritical, and hiss, even boo, when he declares, quote, "intermarriage and race mixing should be prohibited." A Madison police officer on an undercover special assignment is not impressed. Much of Ali's speech was repetitious and not particularly revealing, he reports in a confidential filing filled with misspellings, even including botched versions of the names Muhammad Ali and Cassius Clay. Many times Ali was hissed by the audience, and in fielding questions, he often showed a very infantile mentality. The undercover officer adds he's, quote, "certain that a large number were there only to hear the great boxer, not the Muslim preacher. This because I recognized a number of students I know to be non-radical." On May 17th, 100 or so students confront the Board of Regents at their meeting in Vilas Hall to demand the university sell its $250,000 worth of stock in Chase Manhattan Bank, because the bank had helped prop up the apartheid government of South Africa in 1961. The Regents declined to do so. About 20 to 2 the next morning, someone throws 3 Molotov cocktails into historic South Hall, starting a fire that heavily damages about 15,000 student records, melts fixtures, and causes smoke damage on all 4 floors of the second oldest building on campus. University officials caution against linking the firebombing to the protest over Chase Manhattan stock. And white and black make big red blue. Racial tensions also explode at Camp Randall, deepening the woes of the winless football team. On November 20, Ray Arrington, a black track star and student member of the athletic board, meets privately with the board to tell them about a series of grievances that black football players hold, including a lack of rapport with coaches, the need for academic counseling, and the status of athletes whose eligibility ends before they receive their degrees. They're also upset that quarterback Lou Richardson, son of the team's only black coach, was benched in favor of a white player. And they want several coaches fired or at least reviewed. And there's a very personal matter. Coach John Cota's order that black players not date white women insulted. The black players ignored that directive with impunity, which the white players resent, leaving all upset. White players also get most, though not all, of the easy jobs at the trucking company owned by Cota's father-in-law, former Mayor Henry Reynolds, while more black players work on the line at Oscar Mayer. In late November, 18 of the 26 black players on the team boycott the team banquet at the Fieldhouse. This is just a football thing, one says, not a general protest against the administration. The next day, white linebacker Ken Kreider, the team's MVP, says racial tension is, quote, definitely part of the reason the Badgers have lost their last 15 games, with an 0-19-1 record in the 2 years since Coach Milt Brune was forced out and John Cota hired. Another white defensive player, Tom McCauley, says, quote, there are guys who should have been kicked off the team but were not because they're black. They are the ones who discriminated against us. There's double-barreled bad news at a special joint meeting of the Regents and the Athletic Board on December 5th. First, they hear that football failure has caused a $250,000 deficit in the athletic department budget. Then comes the stunning resignation by popular assistant coach Gene Felker, star end when the Badgers went to the Rose Bowl in 1951, protesting how the administration was handling both the football team and general protest. Black players, quote, committed treason against the coaching staff, and the ringleaders must be fired, Felker says in a lengthy statement to the boards. The one-time Green Bay Packer also blasts, quote, the frightened administrators who will not take a firm stand but would rather try to appease the minority groups on this campus. White coaches have not had an equal opportunity to succeed, he says, noting that black assistant coach Les Richardson has a unique 5-year personal employment contract directly with Harrington. Cota has a 3-year contract through the athletic department. His assistants have only 1-year deals. The next day, the Regents call Cota in and pledge their complete cooperation in helping him return the Badgers to being competitive in Big Ten football. He's got 1 year left on his contract to do so. Spoiler alert, he doesn't. March 18th, 1968, the Bascom Hill Memorial Cemetery. The 1968-69 protest season starts September 14th with the return of an issue from years ago, as about 250 students meet on Library Mall and declare themselves the Freshman ROTC Resistance. What they're resisting is the mandatory orientation classes for Reserve Officer Training Corps, which are still required of freshman males even after ROTC itself was made voluntary in 1960. They vote to boycott and disrupt the classes over the next week, and they do so. The same day, the freshmen are on the mall rallying to resist ROTC, a graduate of the program, Army Lieutenant Harry B. Hamilton III, 24, formerly of 4213 Odana Road, dies on board the hospital ship Repose of wounds received during a firefight 6 days prior. Hamilton graduated from West High School in 1963 and the UW in 1967 when he was commissioned. In his 9 months in Vietnam, he had been awarded 3 Purple Hearts, a presidential citation, the Army Commendation Medal for Heroism, the Bronze Star for Valor, and several other commendations. Hamilton is one of 9 Madison men to die in Vietnam this year. The only other casualty with a university connection is Army Specialist 4 Bernard Bernie Mazursky, 20, whose mother and sisters live at 314 South Orchard Street. A 1966 graduate of Central University High School and member of Beth Israel Center, Mazursky was a UW freshman when he gave up his student deferment and enlisted in December 1966 along with his best friend. He sent to Vietnam on March 23rd and killed in an ambush in Kon on May 4th. Among the other casualties, 2 graduates of La Follette, 1 apiece from Central and East, 1 from St. Joseph's, and Edgewood High School graduate Army Specialist 4 James Leahy, 25, an information specialist with the 39th Engineer Combat Battalion, and the only son of the head of the Madison Draft Board. He dies August 8th of wounds received when his vehicle struck a landmine near Chu Lai, just south of the supply base at Da Nang. Leahy enlisted after graduating from Milton College in 1967, so there wouldn't be accusations of favoritism against his father, Maurice, 4114 Meyer Avenue, a safety specialist at Oscar Mayer, World War II veteran, and the head of Draft Board 13, which handles conscription for city residents. Dateline protest. March 21st. About 700 students packed the Ag Hall Auditorium to hiss Secretary of Agriculture Orville Freeman, heckling him so severely he cuts short his talk. Chancellor Sewell cites this action and the immediate backlash as evidence that disruptors are doing, quote, incalculable damage to the university, and calls on campus leaders to help stop them. That night, while the South Central Federation of Labor is voting against endorsing any city council candidate who supports the upcoming referendum on getting out of Vietnam, a large and happy crowd packs the Dane County Youth Building to greet Republican presidential candidate Richard Nixon. Before dawn, someone sets fire to a side door in Bascom Hall. No lasting physical damage. It is one of a rash of campus firebombings and small fires since the Battle of Dow in October 1967. And 2 days, on May 15th, 2 days before that Chase Manhattan protest, it is epithets and eggs for Selective Service Chief Louis Hershey when the draft director arrives at the Hotel Lorraine for an Armed Forces Day talk to our predecessors at downtown Rotary. The action is organized by the Wisconsin Draft Resistance Union, draws about 300 noisy protesters. Most are orderly, chanting, "Hell no, we won't go," and other anti-draft slogans, as about 50 Madison police officers and 24 helmeted Dane County deputies with mace and riot sticks stand by. But a handful in the crowd throw about 20 eggs, coating Hershey's black station wagon and a few officers. WDRU leaders reproach the egg tossers and seize the remaining stockpile, but the public relations damage has been done. Inside the Crystal Ballroom, the 500 business and professional leaders give Hershey a standing ovation. The 74-year-old military man avoids a second confrontation afterwards by slipping down a back alley and out through a dry cleaning store on the far end of the block. He does not visit his old research director from World War II, Chancellor Sewell. On October 16th, Governor Warren Knowles tells the Downtown Rotary Club, we're always been a popular joint, that the university needs, quote, firm disciplinary measures, so taxpayers are assured it remains, quote, a center of academic discipline, not a never-never land of perpetual adolescence. We should tell the disruptors, the hippies, the narcotics and LSD users, the pornography peddlers, that they are not welcome here. That the calm and moderate Knowles, a former president of the University Alumni Association, would make such a speech is certainly a sign of statewide public opinion. The downtown businessmen cheer his attack on, quote, students raised in a prevailing attitude of permissiveness, from pampering parents to overpromising political leaders. And yes, this is a full 2 years before Spiro Agnew takes on nattering nabobs of negativism. A couple of items from the campus calendar. On January 11th, the chair of the university's parking board proposes excavating Bascom Hill for an underground 600-car parking ramp. Professor Wallace Cleland says he doesn't think there'll be too much opposition, even though the excavation and landscaping would cause the loss of the hill's elm trees because, quote, they will have to go anyway as victims of Dutch elm disease. On May 17th, Shorewood Hills singer Tracy Nelson comes home, at least cinematically. She and her band Mother Earth are featured in the new hippie flick Revolution, which opens that day at the Majestic. She and her band now have a new 3-year contract with Mercury Records. On October 3rd, 3 days after a combined state and federal campus area drug bust nets 46 users and sellers of marijuana and mescaline, the Assembly State Affairs Committee opens hearings into, quote, the problem of drugs in Wisconsin, which Committee Counsel James R. Clouser, Wisconsin Secretary of Administration, 1986 to 1996, declares, quote, a direct attack on the university. The attack is coordinated by Assembly Speaker Harold Freilich, who says, quote, the recent and constant revelations about drug use, demonstrations, and the nude performances on the UW campus attest to the ineffectiveness of the administration's policies. It is only a matter of time before the policies of the UW administration destroy what had become a great state university. The next week, Freilich releases a report entitled Administrators Fiddle as UW Self-Destructs, and warns of direct legislative involvement in campus affairs. A brilliant bit of cross-marketing advertising from Al and Tom Reichenberger, proprietors of the Dangle Lounge. Show of hands, who understands what this ad means? For his 5th and final Screw Theater production, drama major Stuart Gordon psychedelicizes Peter Pan. He keeps much of J.M. Barrie's original text, but having just been beaten and jailed at the Democrat National Convention in his native Chicago, Gordon turns Captain Hook into Mayor Daley, the pirates into cops, and Tinkerbell's pixie dust into LSD. The critical concept of innocence, which is sought